Well, hello everyone. I'm Paul Erickson from Parks Associates, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Role of Content Discovery in OTT. I'd like to take a moment to first thank Conviva for sponsoring today's webinar, and we appreciate them making a topical and informative webinar like we have in store for you today possible. The relationship between content, consumers, and services is constantly changing. And services have to transform their operations to reduce costs, meet future demand, and support new business models. And in this ever-changing environment, it's critical for content and streaming providers to have the right tools to process, manage, and deliver content to both broadcast and digital destinations. And mostly focusing on digital today. So in this webinar, we discuss the challenges inherent in operating in a market in the midst of transition and the technologies needed to find success. And I'm Paul Erickson. I'm a senior analyst at Parks Associates within the entertainment team, and I cover the consumer arena, technologies, devices, and services. And I've been in this technology arena for over 20 years and 16 years as an analyst, covering both the consumer and service provider ends of the video spectrum. And I'm happy to be here today for today's webinar due to its relevance to the situation faced by content owners, services, and consumers today in a crowded OTT market with an abundance of content, connecting consumers with content they want to watch, and the content discovery process is what provides this essential link. Joining me today in a few minutes for our in-depth discussion on content discovery is Nick Cicero, VP of Strategy at Conviva, who will be lending his considerable experience and perspective to our discussion. Hi, Nick. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to us talking a lot more about this topic in a few minutes.
Yeah, good morning, Paul. I'm excited to be here, and we'll dig into things in a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Nick. Before we begin, I'd like to give a quick overview of today's session, and I'll lead off by setting the stage for the topic today with an overview of the streaming landscape from the Parks Associates view based on our research. And from there, with the background set, I'll lead a discussion with Nick from Conviva, covering a number of different aspects of the role of content discovery in the current OTT climate. And some of the topics that we'll touch on today through the course of our discussion include trends in content discovery, the role of social media in today's discovery journey, the role of voice control and input in discovery, and the necessity of a multi-platform strategy in today's streaming landscape. Interspersed within, we'll have a few audience polling questions that we'll ask of you, the audience, through the app, and at the end of my discussion with Nick, we'll then have a brief audience Q&A portion to close our session. So with that said, let's dive right into it, get an idea of the state of OTT video in the US today. And what is the state of the OTT market? Well, it's no secret that the OTT market is riding high. Services adoption is riding high, especially thanks to the pandemic. And the size of the total OTT market has expanded in the past year or so. In Q1 of this year, almost 82% of US broadband households have at least one OTT video subscription, representing steady growth since 2018. OTT video subscribers have now passed traditional pay TV subscribers, and OTT video is now the primary way that US consumers access video content. And those subscriptions are up. It's important to remember that customer acquisition is still vital. One, because as time inside subsides post-pandemic lockdowns, the pressure's on to continue this momentum. And two, keeping subscribers engaged and keeping them subscribed is a challenge for OTT services, where there's no contracts and leaving is easy. And acquisition is even more important for the streaming services of today in order to replace the subscribers that are lost via the inherently higher churn rate that OTT services have. And one reason churn is so high is because of the competitive nature of the market today. The market's crowded, and it's getting even more crowded. And competition today is at an all-time high. And as of the first quarter of 2021, nearly half, 46% of US consumers have 4 or more OTT video subscriptions. Oh, I think we got the wrong slide there. Hold on. Okay, we're back in the right slide. So 46% of US consumers have 4 or more OTT video subscriptions. And last year, it was under half that, at only 22%. Eventually, subscription fatigue among consumers will limit the number of services that they're willing to adopt. And we're likely to see where that line lies as the long-term societal video consumption effects of COVID-19 settle in over time. The takeaway here is that service competition is at an all-time high, and there's a limit to the number of services a household and its budget will bear. Additionally, there's a finite level of viewing hours and engagement available from consumers. The more services are consuming or competing for that pie or pieces of that pie, the harder it is for individual services to be sticky, engaging, and maintain that engagement with the consumer. So keeping viewer engagement high is becoming increasingly important to ensuring a service is a must-have part of consumer subscription stack in this competitive environment. This makes it vital to optimize the content available to them, personalized for them, and able to be found by them. This is key to engaging and retaining them. Let's look at some of Parks Associates consumer survey data to help illustrate and reinforce these points. Sorry, I moved off the slides here. In terms of maximizing customer acquisition, engagement, and stickiness, content is king and the key to success. Parks Associates research shows that within the top 5 factors driving OTT subscriptions, 3 out of the top 5 factors involve content. Also note that on the other side of the equation, not finding the right content or running out of content to watch are two out of the top 5 reasons for people leaving, turning away from a service. Ideally, services should bring subscribers in with content, keep them subscribed with content, and that's the ideal dynamic. Now, 34% of consumers subscribe to get the specific content they wanted to watch. 39% of viewers access services based on specific content available. On the other side of the coin, 1/4 of those canceling an OTT service report doing so because they finished watching the shows they like. 20% of those canceling an OTT service did so because they could not find good programs to watch. The point there is that content is the primary catalyst on both sides of the customer journey. Matching the right kind of content to the right subscriber is the key to maximizing how irreplaceable service is to the consumer in terms of subscribing to and staying with the service. That seems self-evident, but consider that this is essentially academic without the essential link in the equation. They have to be able to find that content and increasingly find or be presented with relevant content that fits them as time goes on. Content discovery is thus essential and is the key to connecting users to relevant content and keeping them connected, which therefore means that discovery is also a key to subscriber acquisition, engagement, and retention. So now that we've established the importance of content in today's market, let's look at how people are consuming that content, specifically on what types of devices they're doing it on. Parks Associates research found that in Q1 2021, when looking at the devices within U.S. broadband households that were the primary device to watch video on, these 3 platforms comprise 65% of those devices: Roku, Samsung Tizen, and Amazon Fire TV. That said, the total picture is still quite diverse, and consumers are watching video on a wide variety of device types. And while these 3 aforementioned platforms control a large chunk of this market, it's clear that services and service providers need to support quite a few platforms in order to maximize their available subscriber market in this competitive landscape. Delivering a consistent experience across this diversity of platforms is its own challenge, and one major and essential part of this experience challenge, is ensuring that the content search and discovery experience is also optimized across this platform diversity. Next, let's look at what type of streaming services people are watching on an OTT basis and in what proportion. Parks Associates consumer surveys found that households are accessing content today primarily through their OTT subscriptions. And OTT is the most popular option for consuming online video content, and over 2/3 of households access at least one listed service, with 25% accessing ad-based OTT and 18% using transactional services. When we asked consumers the type of OTT business model or type that they had accessed in the past 30 days, 69% had accessed at least one type of service. And of that, 58% were OTT service subscribers, or SVOD subscribers, 25% were AVOD users, and 18% were transactional service users. And OTT consumers watch their content via a variety of service models, and this diversity of service types being utilized is expected to continue. And while we've established the importance of content and the diversified nature of the platforms and service types that people are using to watch OTT video, let's look at another factor that holds weight in the mind of consumers. And that is price. While content is king, OTT video consumers consider an appealing price point above other motivators. Now, key services have experimented with diversified pricing options, including Disney Plus's introduction of transactional purchases, Peacock's freemium model, and the cheaper ad-supported tiers introduced to HBO Max and Paramount Plus. Free ad-supported services are also poised to succeed as a means for viewers to find additional content without adding to their monthly bills. And the implication going forward is that a hybrid pricing approach meets consumers where they are. It maximizes revenue potential via this hybrid pricing, and it helps services fund their investments in growing their content libraries going forward. And beyond the price of content being a fundamental factor for consumers, another aspect of content that matters is the type of content in the portfolio. Users more frequently access services that offer a variety of content categories and genres of movies and TV shows. And viewers have indicated an average of 70% of their content viewing goes to services that feature a broad variety of content. And over 1/3 of viewers dedicate over 3/4 of their time to services with a variety of genres. And the big three OTT services and their closest competitors, they all feature a variety of programming across genres. And niche services have the potential to penetrate this market through bundling deals. For example, AMC has bundled together its niche services Shudder, Sundance Now, and IFC Films within AMC Plus to give viewers more options. Having a diverse content library is a vital part of driving engagement, but the other part of the equation is actually getting people to find it, and that involves the discovery process. And through our discussions in a few minutes, we'll delve quite a bit deeper into content discovery. I'd like to wind up this opening market background segment with a few observations on consumer search and discovery behavior from our own consumer survey research as a teaser for the discussions ahead. The first is what we found relating to the consumer video content access journey. And browsing service libraries and searching for specific programs are key early steps in content discovery. Half of viewers rank browsing the extent of content offered on their online video services within their top 3 habits, and over 1/5 do so first. Services search to retain subscribers through the ease of navigation when browsing, or search is used to retain subscribers through the ease of navigation when browsing. And Pluto TV recently upgraded its browsing options through an expanded on-demand section and personalized recommendations. 1/5 of viewers search for specific programming as their first step in the process. And services survival is often determined by specific exclusive programming, such as HBO Max's uptick in subscriptions following the exclusive windowing for theatrical titles from Warner Brothers. And essentially the takeaway here is that browsing, search, and the discovery process in general are a basic and fundamental part of OTT subscribers' viewing experience. Content discovery is an indelible, inseparable component of how people watch OTT video, and it's therefore a fundamental aspect of the experience that companies should concentrate on getting right. Finally, let's look at an area of search and discovery that is a much talked about technical feature for many connected video devices today. And that is the use of voice input for search and control of the experience. Parks Associates research in Q1 of this year found that voice control is never or extremely rarely used for control of the video experience by roughly half of respondents on the top 2 home connected TV platforms, smart TVs and streaming media players. And streaming media players were the lowest at 54% of respondents never or rarely using voice. And we can see from this that voice still has quite a way to go to be a ubiquitous part of the video consumption experience. Unsurprisingly, voice usage is highest on smartphones, likely due to the familiarity of the use of voice assistants that already exists with smartphone users. The fact that set-top box users have entertainment voice control usage that's slightly higher than even smartphones is telling. And the issue here is that regardless of the fortunes of the traditional pay TV industry, either their set-top boxes have a better implementation of voice control, where that sector has been more successful at making its subscribers acquainted with and comfortable with using voice control. And voice still has an important role in removing friction from the video consumption experience on connected devices, particularly for content search and hands-free playback initiation. But it's in the interest of streaming video services, device manufacturers, and others to work together to improve entertainment voice control and consumer comfort with voice control on these two significant platforms, smart TVs and streaming media players. However, even when voice input and control reach a high level of engagement and capability, in the end, it's still merely an input and interface tool. The content discovery fundamentals underneath the real engine are qualitatively what's actually powering the experience for consumers. And we'll explore some of those fundamentals and best practices in the minutes ahead. To summarize, the OTT market is booming, along with competition and the amount of services competing for the consumer dollar. And with that, subscriber acquisition, engagement, and retention are crucial and as much of a focus as ever, and content is the key to all three of those. Now, discovery is crucial to connecting consumers to that content and keeping them connected throughout the journey. And in today's competitive environment, optimizing the content discovery process is essential for success. To help explore this topic a bit further, we're going into some more in-depth discussion, and we're honored to have with us today Nick Cicero from Conviva to help us discuss the role of content discovery in today's OTT market.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Paul.
Strategy at Conviva. I'm about to introduce you here, so let me run through your bio, Nick. As VP of Strategy at Conviva, Nick is focused on extending Conviva's portfolio of measurement products, enabling streaming TV providers to better understand the viewer journey to grow viewership, engagement, and revenue. And in Nick's 15 years in the industry, he's been at the forefront of a number of notable industry initiatives, such as co-producing the first Snapchat branded content series with Marriott Rewards, building a social content experience for PlayStation, and working with Oprah to put the first Instagram video on TV. He also created the first enterprise analytics solutions for Snapchat, Instagram Stories, and Facebook Live. And he's worked with many major brands and publishers throughout his career, including ABC News, Turner, Viacom, Fox Sports, ESPN, NASCAR, Red Bull, Universal Music Group, and TED, to name a few. Nick, thank you for joining us. And before we begin our discussion, would you mind telling us a bit about Conviva and its role in the OTT market? And I'm going to turn things over to you here, so give me a second.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paul. So yeah, happy to talk a little bit more about Conviva and what role we play in the OTT space. We're also today going to share some of the insights that we found as we also completed a recent survey on content discovery, where we interviewed I think around 2,500 consumers on how they are finding content today. So as you kind of mentioned before, there's such a fragmented ecosystem today with more choices than ever before, not just in streaming video, but also kind of the larger umbrella of digital video, right? One of the things that we'll talk about is the role of social on the streaming video consumer, right? And with platforms like TikTok passing the amount of video consumption on YouTube, right? And YouTube kind of being well known as a major player in the CTV space as well in terms of viewership. Social is also really eating into it. So it's more important than ever before for streaming marketers and content providers to better understand the viewer. But just to give a little bit about Conviva, Conviva is one of the leaders in streaming video intelligence. So we've been around for around 14 years and started off in the quality of experience space. So today our sensor is deployed with 4 billion different devices, collecting trillions of events every single day across some of the world's leading publishers in the streaming space. So folks like CBS, Disney, DAZN, Hulu, Sling, Warner Media, NBC, and others. So we have a single sensor that gets deployed to every one of your different video players, whether it's on mobile sites, apps, inside of connected TV devices, and also have integrations with all of the major social media platforms as well. So we're able to bring in every single second of every viewer session for all of the video that you publish, and focus on 3 key areas. As I mentioned before, the quality of experience. So how does your video deliver the content to the viewer? What types of delivery mechanisms are causing failures and rebuffering, and how do you give them the best quality of experience? We're also measuring ad consumption and being able to do things like unduplicated reach and frequency across the family of video properties, right? Being able to better understand the performance of advertising and understand the audience to help segment. And we also provide content engagement, which is a lot of what we'll talk about today, which is, how do you actually go and create the best experience once you have that service that you've built up, right? So as Paul mentioned before, it's a chicken and an egg scenario, right? You have to acquire the viewers to get them to build a service, but then you also have to keep them on and retain them. And so there's really 2 key parts of that acquisition and retention that content discovery plays a crucial part in, which we'll talk about a little bit more today.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. Well, I'd like to kick things off with perhaps a big picture question to frame everything. And what do you think is the most pressing problem to solve today in terms of consumer search and discovery process from your view? I mean, is it something to solve on the technical side, such as analytics, development, experience-related development, or is it instead related to the consumer side, so awareness, understanding, marketing, and so on?
Honestly, I think it's a combination of both of those. So I think today where we're at with the streaming industry is, as I mentioned before, you have to have a great product to be able to surface the right content, to have the good experience when somebody goes into the app. But then we also need a lot more marketing support and community building related to streaming services and streaming content, right? So if you look at some of the data here, right, there are more than 3,000 streaming services right now that are being marketed across the US, UK, and EU, right? And we're talking about subscription videos, AVOD channels. You have fast channels now where people are looking for free content, but publishers distribute to these other platforms. And then you also have the multitude of owned and operated devices, right? So think about the number of people who might log in and watch news videos on CNN or ESPN and consume content that way, or then finally social, right? So you have all of these different areas that are kind of competing with that. And there's really a war on engagement today, right? So publishers that are looking to build that business need to understand that there are really the top 2 or 3 major players that take up a big chunk of the streaming viewership, as we'll talk about potentially in a little bit. And so if you're really not in the top 2 or 3 based on the number of services that people are subscribing to, you really need to work hard to make sure that your brand is either fulfilling a niche for somebody who's really interested in a certain type of content, or you need to figure out a really great advertising and marketing strategy to have a constant acquisition strategy. So it's really about product marketing and advertising strategies all aligning today to make sure that whether a viewer opens their laptop or opens their mobile phone or sits down on their couch and starts turning on the big screen, that your content is going to be top of mind.
Perfect. Well, I think one other thing that comes up when I think about the search and discovery journey, and what is more common today when we look at the type of experiences that are being presented on today's mainstream consumer devices, smart TVs, and streaming media players, is the concept of universal search. And aggregated discovery and universal search, it's becoming more common. And I think whether we're talking about streaming, a regular consumer streaming device, a service provider, set-top box, that's just becoming more of a common part of the experience, is to have this universal search. What other advances are addressing the challenge of users having to find the content they want through a glut of services and so many different content choices?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just in general, kind of abstracting this, it's really about the technology. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more about AI here, but really the applications of data processing and the ability to collect data at a more granular level than previously seen in kind of the media measurement space is really the game changer here. So if you consider, somebody like Nielsen that has predominantly relied on, a panel-based survey approach for a long time, right, you are only able to really see data for a small slice, right? On average, the Nielsen panel size, I think, might be less than, half of what a typical post might reach for somebody on Facebook, for example, just in terms of the sheer number of people who are able to actually see that and the data that we're able to pull back around that. And so now that we're seeing so much more video consumption move from traditional linear sources to more digital and internet enabled devices, this now gives us the ability to capture more granular information, right? So really with so much more, I mean, think you mentioned in your stats earlier that upwards of 80% of households who are streaming. In our study, we found that 18% of people weren't watching any other linear television and purely going on streaming services alone. You have this predominant format that is internet delivered video, and that means that we can be more accurate in terms of what we're able to measure, and then apply artificial intelligence and machine learning and other types of ways to be able to basically look at relationships in the data in a much faster way than humans can ever process, which gives us then the ability to build the types of systems that we need to have to be able to activate on these viewers, to be able to deliver better content experiences to them, to be able to understand the small nuances that maybe the human eye or brain might not detect unless you were really purposefully going in to a piece of content or to look for a particular problem. But even then, the amount of time that a human would take to be able to get to the insights that we can get today is obviously so much greater. So the advantage of being able to, one, collect all of this data at a high fidelity level, especially with obviously platforms like Conviva that do video player census level measurement that measure literally every second of every stream on every screen that you have, you're able to actually build these really rich relationships in the data and then be able to have systems that can take action on those. So if I see a segment of viewers that are over indexing, I might go out and connect that data and say, hey, here's marketing campaign X that we started running 2 days ago, and all of a sudden now we've seen a huge conversion, right? And we're seeing a big spike in traffic from people that are coming in from that campaign, and here are the demographics around who's watching our content. Now let's take a segment of that data and go run it back into our ad buying systems or our marketing automation systems to be able to go and activate and spend more money to bring in more viewers, right? So the ability to have that system in near real time is so powerful, and obviously the consumer is benefiting because everybody wants to build that great content experience.
Yeah, I think we're, with the industry, we talk about AI all the time, but I think I'm very curious to see and very enthusiastic to see how it's being applied and how it will be applied within this particular context, because I think the key here for services is that engagement, is that ability to build that recommendation, then the follow-up recommendation, and then the chain of getting smarter and better and knowing what we're viewing. And that will be some of the secret sauce that it takes to make services sticky and be retained by consumers, because they're continually finding things they want to watch. And AI is just going to be better at processing that massive amount of data and finding those particular nuances that would be nearly impossible or would take a lot of time to manually do it via the old human analog method.
Absolutely.
So with that, yeah, and I think touching on that, how do consumers find content today, especially as I mentioned, that second or third piece of content once they've watched their first choice? What's unique to that behavior and their journey?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, I think you highlighted it before. It's definitely a challenge for consumers today. And I think that is one of the reasons why, your guys' study and also in our survey, as I'll pull up here, is that, the way that users are actually finding the pieces of content is more fragmented than ever before. When it comes to kind of the marketing signals around that, in our survey, we found that, the largest for people who are high consumers of streaming media, so these are people that over-index and watch the most streaming service content, the biggest way that they found content was first word of mouth, followed by advertising, social media, and then finally through recommendations of a streaming service. Now there were obviously more options, but when we group these into kind of the marketing categories, this is what the activities kind of bubbled up under. So I think what's really interesting is you have to look at the way that people are actually talking about the content, finding the content, and looking at the position of that. So as we said, 59% of the survey respondents basically said that they discovered content through word of mouth, chatting with, or seeing social media posts from friends, families, and influencers. So tapping into these word of mouth strategies are going to be crucial for the content providers to get widespread market adoption, in particular those early adopters, right? Which is super crucial today, as we'll talk about in a little bit with social media. When we segment and categorize the types of streaming consumers today, we really looked at 4 different groups. You kind of have your light consumers or your serendipities who may be watching significantly less content, folks that probably have a lot more going on in their day. But then when you go to more younger audiences who are over-indexing on content, so that streaming first segment, people who are more pure play streaming and don't watch linear, and then finally your heavies, so the people that basically over-index on all streaming video, linear TV, and social media, you find that in those segments of streaming first and heavies, that word of mouth is one of the highest signals that kept showing up in our survey. And also the activities that they responded, which I don't have a graph to show this right now, they also were the highest segments of people to respond to actually being the ones to recommend. So I think what's really interesting too is that, the people who are really interested who are your probably your most active viewers on your particular streaming service, those are probably also the people who are really recommending the different shows that you're releasing or different series or exposing their friends to it. So it's super important to figure out not only how do we create a word of mouth strategy to bring in new viewers of all types, but then how do we also lean into our heaviest viewers to be able to tap into their sense of wanting to share that content or be the first to tell their friends about a cool show. I mean, I'll use a pretty obvious example, right? But I'm sure that everybody here remembers where they heard about Squid Game, right? And it probably wasn't from an ad, right? It was probably either word of mouth, social media, or via a streaming service, right? So being able to tap into these types of channels, in particular word of mouth, I think is really important. Kind of flipping to that, when we look at, so once again, this is results based on the folks who consume the most streaming content. If we kind of separate the media channels and look at the actual kind of activities for how people responded for sources of discovery, very similar to how Paul mentioned that they're browsing. In our response, they talked about discovering it by chance. So it's really interesting that the general consumer is still swayed by chance and discovery. I think where this is really interesting is the fact that it's not always about the first piece of content. The first piece of content is obviously very important, and we help customers look at insights around what types of content acquire the most new users, which is obviously extremely valuable. But the whole other piece of that is the retention part. So, for example, most streaming services are going to have kind of their core catalog of releases, the big hits or the original content that they may be producing, or the hits that they're acquiring, or the new series that they may be acquiring. And they're going to really anchor, kind of a core acquisition strategy, maybe around some of these bigger tentpole items. But there's probably only going to be a finite number of those series that you're going to be able to market publicly, right? You obviously, if you have a catalog of, even hundreds of different series or types of content, there's obviously competition for just how much you can actually, push out publicly on social media in some of these areas. So you're going to be able to see that a lot of the hits are going to drive in probably people when you do the campaigns, but then after they come in, how do you keep them on? How do they go back and find new types of content? So once they become a subscriber to your service, how do you keep them to come back week over week? Is it just because you have a really robust show that's episodic, that's really deep, or are you releasing a lot of new content, or are you building recommendations? Are you building ways of curation for people to constantly have a new experience and find new content every time they come in, right? So it's so important to be able to think about both the practical nature of your recommendations and your search experience, but also how intelligent is it, right? I think people want that level of serendipity where they log in and they say, oh man, of course I'd want to watch that content. That's totally something that I would be interested in. And they can go and discover new things that may not be the newest of the new. They may be older shows that you may never have seen before. And when we look at the platforms, like social media is such a great example of this, because going back to the AI discussion, one of the challenges for this within streaming companies today is the scale, right? So you can build content curation and with data and insights, you can build search based on different insights, but you also, to have the most intelligent search and the most usable search, you also need a good amount of data to have those right recommendations, to have the right suggestions. And that's one of the things that we can see with some of the most well-known curation and recommendation and search types of companies. I would say, argue YouTube, TikTok, and Netflix, right? So when we think about those three platforms, everybody talks about the powers of their algorithm, the power of curation. I think YouTube gets the bulk of its plays off of recommendations and videos, right? And TikTok is obviously has become super well known for having a extremely advanced content personalization algorithm. And they're able to do that though because they have an immense amount of scale. And so I think that's the other piece that is still a challenge, is how do we get the right data to be able to get to the scale to make these kind of triggers and hooks inside, whether that's through marketing or through the product innovations too.
Yeah, and you mentioned data. I think we see a lot of activity today around getting smarter and better data, and some of that's being aided by the use of AI increasingly. But I think we're seeing a lot of activity around leveraging data to the hilt, essentially to really drive the process. And from your view, how are companies using content engagement analytics data to maximize revenues and retention? I mean, what are best practices for services and content providers to really follow in this arena?
Yeah, maybe we break that into two parts. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of call out is the value and the importance of segmentation, right? So today's consumers, as we started to talk about before, we have more individual inputs of insight than we ever have before. We can know information around the series title, the name, the original broadcaster, right? We have AI and computer vision that can go in and identify the scene breaks that are in there, the logos or the objects that are inside of there, and pull out additional metadata and insights. And then we also know the viewing behavior, right? We understand how long are people watching, what devices are they watching for, what types of other content are they watching, right? So when you have the ability to collect all of these different inputs, you're able to then build really rich audience segments that tap into what those viewers are doing and look at the overlap and the relationship between those, which is definitely one of the things that our customers are doing quite a bit with the Conviva platform, right? Is they're looking at all of the different audiences who are watching a particular show or a series, or building an audience segment about a demographic, and I'll talk a little bit more how we dig into that. But they're basically building these audience segments so they can understand what they're watching. So now we're not just looking at all of the people who watched Squid Game. Now we're looking at people. What if we want to look at people who watched Squid Game before it blew up? Right? Maybe they want to find a segment of who are those early discovering adopters of Squid Game, and let's look at what other types of content that they're watching, right? So being able to use segmentation allows you to understand how different pockets of consumers are actually watching and engaging with your content, and being able to take those insights to both build better recommendation engines, but also to build more marketing and retention strategies to be able to tap into those folks. So that segmentation, we think is super crucial. And then also as we, move into the ads world, as you think about that, more and more today, we're seeing streaming TV publishers want to measure the ad consumption and content consumption with a single unified set of segments, right? So, we work with companies like Experian to be able to take Conviva data, enrich that with the Experian data to be able to match that and allow customers and to be able to now see the same segments of people that may consume ads, that are watching content, and discover the relationships between that. So instead of just moving towards this kind of like giant spray and pay model, with streaming video in particular, you can be a lot more precise with reaching certain types of audiences that are consuming this content. So in terms of how do you then, once you have those segmentations, or once you have a a partner to be able to build those segmentations out, you really need to kind of understand a little bit more of your baseline metrics. So some of these are gonna vary whether you're an SVOD or an AVOD, or if you're maybe just consuming on mobile video, or you have a similar type of service. But the first is really like baseline consumption metrics, things like your average viewership, your unique viewers, the average watch time, or the number of pieces of content per sitting, as just an example. Next, one of the best practices that we're seeing today is really establishing that North Star metric. So it's usually some combination of metrics that really quantify streaming engagement success within your business. And this is going to kind of vary depending on what type of service that you have, but it might be, is there a certain amount of time per week or per session that a viewer wants to be watching for? Is it a certain number of pieces of content in a week? Is it some combination of those metrics, and then probably adding in a subscription, new subscriber, or free trial variable on top of that, so you can then identify what was percentage of my free viewers hit the North Star metric, and how many of those can I get to convert, and then when I follow and track them, how do I convert them? So being able to establish your baseline for success based on the traffic that you have today, and then building that North Star metric on top of that is going to be really crucial, because then you can basically apply any of the different types of insights that you want to go into or dig into with that North Star metric. So if you want to go in and take a look at that new series that you just released, to be able to understand, okay, I just launched this brand new series, how many people in my how many of my best customers are actually watching that? How many people in that North Star segment are watching that? How many new viewers that I acquired from that piece of content end up becoming these quality viewers, or viewers that might be in my North Star segment, right? So being able to identify and track those viewing behaviors is super relevant for being able to then make those business decisions, or being able to go in and apply different tactics. If you see that you're looking to target a particular demographic, let's say you set out a goal for a particular quarter to increase the amount of women 18 to 24 in your North Star segment by 50%. Right, that gives you the ability to actually go in and dig in and see, are we hitting the goals that we're setting out to do? And if not, what can we do with the people who are in there to be able to help pull insights out and maybe go and attract more viewers? So once again, in that example, maybe I would go in and apply a North Star metric to a demographic of women 18 to 24, and see what types of content that they're watching, see what's the content that they watch the most often, what is the content that they're the most deeply engaged with, when are they watching that, right? What are the different marketing channels that I was able to acquire them on? And then be able to take those insights and even take the user level data to be able to go and bring that back in once again to marketing automation systems, or maybe you're going and digging into your creative and maybe running a big social campaign to be able to drive that. Those are just a couple that, I could probably spend all day talking about how to get into the weeds and slice and dice data, but I think the strongest idea for folks today to think about is building that North Star metric that combines a number of consumption and frequency metrics, and also, once again, establish your baseline, and finally build that in a system that allows you to measure those metrics via segments, which allows you then to basically slice and dice any of those different metrics that you want based on any of the metadata and variables that you want to bring in.
Thanks. It's a lot of factors to consider there, especially with the complexity of it. But I think for me, the portions I found the most interesting, I think, is I really was not aware of really how powerful the word of mouth aspects are. I mean, we talk a lot about social media, within the industry and how to best leverage it. But I think the real X factor there is really getting to word of mouth. And I think for me, that was really interesting to see how powerful it actually is. And then, so how do you, drive word of mouth from an underlying basis? It's just such an interesting X factor. And, as we talk about, trends as of late, how is the importance of search and discovery changing as of late, especially from the industry view? And, how has it changed as the world is, kind of adopted OTT like crazy over this, past 18 months, and streaming video consumption is just growing at such a frenzied pace? and across such a diversity of different types of devices that people are watching OTT on. How is all of this changing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and this also ties into the word of mouth component, is really just this X factor of social platforms today that I think is different. And we're obviously in a very it's a wild world, right? Because probably 2 years ago, even though everybody knew that streaming was inevitable, who would have expected, something like, the pandemic to happen and have everybody be sitting at home, right? So really, the only things that you had to do were stream content online or watch TV and engage with people on social media. So I think that what we have seen is one, just a lot more discussion around different types of content. There are obviously some really fun, goofy hits that I'm sure we all remember from the pandemic, like Tiger King and others that kind of permeated through everything. And there, obviously people were starting to share more, and I think that the streaming services themselves also realized this opportunity. But I would also say that also trickles into word of mouth, right? So as we talked about before, word of mouth used to mean literally just going and telling your friends or talking about it with your friends and family. And probably in person, right? I don't know if people might send letters to each other in the 70s or 80s saying you got to watch this TV show. Maybe I'm sure that somebody wrote it, but I feel like it was much more of an in-person discussion type of opportunity, and that's expanded. But now with social and really the internet on the whole, there's so many different crossover areas. So somebody who might say that they discover content based on reviews or things like that. What types of reviews? Do they mean Rotten Tomato reviews that are community? Do they mean official reviews from newspapers that they might read on their website? Or do they mean YouTube movie reviewers, of which there are thousands of them out there today, right? If you drop a new Marvel movie, you're going to see tens of thousands of videos commenting and reviewing on it pretty quickly. So where does that happen? And that's why for us it's so interesting when we look at the direct relationship between social media usage and streaming video consumption. So, as we found in our report, there's such a high correlation between the amount of social media that you use and the amount of streaming content that you have as well. Mainly because you're so used to being predisposed to streaming content, but also being, having your attention pulled in a couple different directions, let's just say, right? So multitasking, sitting, watching a show while you might be engaging with somebody on Twitter. So the value of social media, I think, has become pretty critical, right? The ability to also drive the community and tap into those traditional marketing channels like word of mouth, but adapt that for the way that streaming consumers are interacting through a word of mouth manner. Also, just even the activities that people are doing, as you can see here, they're so predisposed to watching video, right? When we asked the survey respondents what were their social media activities in a given week, one of the top responses was watching at least 1 minute of video and watching a full video, right? And obviously friends are going to take up the top percentage of that. So this video usage on social is ubiquitous, literally, right? 10 years ago, there's very little video that existed on social media. YouTube was pretty much the main one. And then pretty much since 2014, we've seen this revolution starting with Snapchat, where it was basically Snapchat came out with video, Facebook really dug their heels into video with going with YouTube, Vine was coming out, and then went away. So we had all of these elements that were kind of tied together. And now we have TikTok, where there are folks who really are just coming of age, where 13, 14 years old, and a lot of all they know is video on social, right? Or platforms like TikTok that are 100% video and in the communication means, even though they might comment and message with people, right? So this ubiquity of streaming video extends beyond streaming platforms, and that's why tapping into social media, whether that's through social ads and also really around building community and tapping into influencers, is so important today, because not only are they predisposed to watch this content, but they're also doing a lot of that today, and it's really providing a lot of synergy for the companies that we see. So I would say finally, just to kind of, how is that changing, and how has the world kind of adopted that at a frenzied pace? Well, I mean, ultimately, right, this content discovery and being able to better understand and how to apply data in your content discovery strategy basically is the true path to building an audience for monetization, right? For the leading publishers today, walled gardens are great at this, right? The Netflix, Facebooks, Googles of the world, and they've really dominated a lot of the landscape of both streaming and digital advertising as a result of that, right? And they're doing that because they understand how to surface content across users and put things in front of them that are going to elicit a response or elicit them to watch content. So there's a huge opportunity here. It's really early, right? But the great thing is technologically, we have all the tools, right? Companies like Conviva have been building these and are doing this at scale for, most of the world's largest streaming companies. And now the teams are adapting to that, putting these into practice and moving them out of just the measurement of the technical quality of the video into actual activation of that data, the segmentation, the being able to create great content promotion and recommendations based off of that. So the big players are already starting to do this, and that's going to increase heavily, and we're going to see the competition for that type of technology and insights become even more important. But then for this second wave of streaming services, these, I would say, tier 2, tier 3, wider set of streaming services that aren't the Amazon, Netflix, Hulu's of the world, there is an infinite amount of opportunity to dig in and have niche and differentiating content, as you mentioned before, Paul. So being able to understand your audience, understand how to reach that audience and have a unique position in the market allows you to compete with the big players in the game, because you're really just competing for share of time. And if there is a service that I love being a part of, that has the content that I want to watch, that has a community that I feel like I'm part of, that is always engaging and changing and keeping me feel like it's fresh, it doesn't matter if it's Hulu or Shudder or your local trout fisherman's YouTube channel, right? It's really all about being able to take those things, and there's a huge opportunity for folks that haven't gotten into streaming publishing or are just starting their journey in streaming to be able to close the gap really quickly and start to solve problems.
Agreed. I would be remiss if I did not go to one of our audience polling questions. It would be good to get some audience input here. So let's open the poll, launch a poll. Okay, so our first question is going to be on the user experience area. Well, essentially, what user experience areas are going to improvement in which user experience areas are going to make the most difference in viewers' discovery process. And so here we're asking, could that be a super aggregated interface? Or would it be the visual order or layout within the user experience that's presented? Would it be deeper insights driven deeper insights driven personalized content recommendations, essentially, smarter and better recommendations, more granular user control, smarter or faster voice search of the content, smarter or faster voice control or UX navigation, moving through the interface, or none of the above. So as we wait for some of those results to come in, from your perspective, and Nick, what aspect of the experience do you think is most important when it comes to discovery, and or where can the most improvement yield the most benefit for the user?
Well, I'm very biased because I work in data and analytics, so I'm going to choose the deeper insights-driven personalized content recommendations. And I would combine that also with not just about the personalization for a single user. I also think, once again, it's about taking data and being able to personalize content for the community of viewers, your whole user base, right? So things like breaking out custom content curation for Latino creators or Black creators, and some of the things that I think Hulu is doing. It's also about the right curation in the recommendations, and you're going to be able to use data and insights to also surface those up too.
Okay, and for me, my personal opinion, I think as we give the poll another few seconds here for results to come in. For me, I think any experience when it comes to discovery, and unfortunately it's an area where there's so much variability, is going to be just the essential layout of the experience. And we already see that, a number of different platform providers and people who control the experience are, essentially exchanging favorable placement within that experience based on, how much a party wants to pay or what their particular deal might be. But I think that there's some fundamentals there within the user experience that do matter quite a bit. And I think the main one is the visual presentation. But also I think, within that, how smart the pieces of content are that are coming up within these new content forward interfaces. So with that, let's close the poll. We can have on the park side here, have us close the poll.
While we wait for the next poll, I would just encourage everyone, and I'm sure that we'll send a link or drop a link in the chat here. The Conviva Content Discovery Report is free. It's available on our website. So I've shown you just a couple of the different graphs inside of here, but we have a full report that we just released, and would love for everybody to download it and check it out.
Okay, so if we could display the results from the poll.
So it looks like 44% say deeper insights driven personalized content recommendations, followed by the 34% for the unified and super aggregated interface. And more granular user control seems to be least popular response.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's not too surprising to me. I think for most people, when they see the palette of choices that's put in front of them increasingly be more and more of what they're looking for, then they're more likely to their time to content, so to speak, is faster, right? Or more, or put a finer point at their time to relevant content is faster, right? When that first view that they get is filled with choices that are relevant to them.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's actually put up another polling question, because this is good stuff here. Let's open the poll for number 2, and that's pulling a little bit back and asking a bigger question: what's the most important element of the content discovery journey to get right for users? So is it personalized recommendations? Is it search overall, either voice or text? Is it metadata and contextual related information? Is it the user experience? And within that, is the visual presentation, the ordering or placement within the UX, or is it the kind of the flow there, the journey, the workflow to get to your content? Is it a deep enough content library to draw upon, right, for recommendation and consumption purposes? Is it marketing and advertising? Is it really getting that aspect of the equation right, or none of the above? And I think me personally, and I can't back this with any data, but I think for me, through the course of my video consumption experiences, for me, I think it really is recommendations. And this comes to this observation comes to me because when I look at my wife's Netflix, or it happens to be, I'm not a crazy husband, but sometimes I do have to use my wife's TV or her phone, and I see her Netflix recommendations. They're vastly different from mine, right? And the same thing for a number of other services. And to me, that speaks to just the power of personalization, where a lot of that content I'm not interested in, but for her, it's perfectly within her particular interests. And so I think for me, what I feel is that the content discovery journey in order for it to be unique to every person and for them to really see the things that they want to consume and for more of their time on a device or in a service being spent actually watching content that they want. I think the recommendations are the first thing and most important thing to get right, but that's just my view. Nick, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think so, like, not to get into the weeds, but I feel like I think the personalized recommendations are the most important from like the consumer's perspective, and from the publisher's perspective, that's why it's really important to get the metadata and context and the UX right, because if you're not capturing and categorizing the right data to be able to segment those viewers, you're not going to be able to take insights to build a recommendation engine, and or even have the insights to be able to, even if it's not automated and you're just curating, even to have the right insights for that. And then you need a good UX, because if I give recommendations but they're buried somewhere inside of there, I may never see them, right? So I have to say I totally agree with you, but I think this is a little bit of a trick question because it's kind of two sides here.
Yeah, there's speaking of getting into the weeds, there's a lot of different things to delve into with this one, because it's usually not just
Right.
a simple thing when you're talking recommendations or the discovery journey. Let's close this poll and let's put up the results and see what we've got.
Wow. UX, far and away the runaway.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we might have a lot of product and design folks on the call. I guess I don't know. I'm not sure the audience of everybody here, but no. Once again, I think that this is kind of a trick question because a lot of these are interdependent upon one another, right? So having a great UX with personalized recommendations almost kind of have to go hand in hand. So not super surprising here.
Right. Well, let's. I think we can squeeze in one more polling question as long as we're doing the polling, and it should speak to pretty much everybody in the industry that's in our audience. And can we go with polling question 3? Can we put that open? Yeah, okay, we've got that one. So with this one, what are the biggest measurement challenges services and content owners face with streaming? Is it viewer acquisition and retention? Is it content engagement? Or is it measuring ad effectiveness? And so for this one, to me, I really think that the biggest challenge here is engagement. And I think, when at least from my perspective, especially since the nature of viewing has gotten so maybe not fragmented, but more diverse, right, across so many different services, people diving in and out across different use cases, right, in and out of home, on any number of different devices that they may have with them, and even within a household, who's using what device at a particular time. And so really pulling out of that massive trove of data, understanding engagement per subscriber, per user, per household, to me, that's the biggest challenge. Nick, I don't know if you agree or if there's some other aspect that you think is the biggest challenge measurement wise.
Yeah, I mean, once again, trick question. This is obviously something that's near and dear to our heart because we think all 5 of these are the biggest measurement challenges that streaming providers face today. I definitely would agree that the engagement of content and understanding that viewer journey is one of the most difficult types of things to do today. Certainly, some folks have looked at app analytics in the past for trying to at least acquire people, although I do think it takes a more sophisticated model than the app analytics that we've kind of seen in the past. So yeah, from our perspective, it's all about the content engagement, understanding the journey, and then once again, all of this should be anchored in looking at an audience-centric view of that content.
Okay, agreed. Can we close the poll and put up the results, please?
This is great. We got a little bit more, little even content engagement, ad effectiveness, and the viewer journey. Awesome.
Okay. This one's
Well,
not quite
obviously, we'd love to talk with all of you folks. If you have any of the challenges, we would love to chat with you about how to make these percentages all go down to very low very quickly.
Yeah, so let's close the polls, or let's put away the polls. And at this point, I would like to go to some audience Q&A to close out our program here. And I have a question here, and I'd like to, while we get through this first question, I'd like to encourage the audience to send in your questions through the app. Okay, in the questions section of the app, there's an area there where you can input, and feel free to send questions our way for us, but particularly Nick from Conviva, since he is our expert on the call. So, Nick, our first question that we have here, I'm going to expand this one, is how does search within a service compare to search within a device across a range of services in terms of importance and frequency of use?
Well, I don't have any like hard concrete data to be able to give a data backed answer to that, to say like this is different than this. I think that the concept is really interesting of how you track that for sure, because certainly if I'll just use like my iPhone as an example, right? If I search for a program and then Hulu says, oh, okay, you can log in. If I search for Saturday Night Live and then Apple, right, Siri suggests that I watch it in Hulu and I jump into that, right? It's obviously really important for the team at Hulu to be able to understand that it came from an app level or like a device level search as opposed to logging into the Hulu app and searching Saturday Night Live. And I think that kind of ties back to what you were mentioning, Paul, about more of this universal search and different layers of search, or even the super aggregation, right? Even the way that like the new Apple TV integrates stuff from all of the different subscriptions that I have access to, and then I'm searching on Apple, or I could be, searching within that app. So I think it's really important just to be able to have a strong way to measure that and be able to understand that, because there may be something, there may be something else, right? A consumer behavior that might be triggering those top of mind searches, right? Like what's making you think about that where you just need to search for it at the device as opposed to sitting down and opening up a Hulu app, for example, and then finding that. So there might be something related to your service or your content that can be more top of mind. And, ultimately, if you find that that's a really powerful methodology in the way that people are coming in and consuming your content, right? That's a great way to be able to go back to your partnerships team, and maybe, you do look at other ways to do that, right? If that's working, I mean, same thing. If you see a lot of people coming in from Snapchat, maybe that's the right platform to do a mini app that loads, right? More of the, more platforms offer these types of advanced integrations as well. And how, even how you show up in a Siri search or an Android search, for example, is really powerful at the device level. So I think it's really important to be able to identify both. And if I were a publisher, I would want to know if that search is coming from my app or if it's coming from somebody else's outside of that.
Agreed. Okay, so we'd like to encourage our audience to send in a few more questions. I've got one of my own as we wait for a few more audience Q&A inquiries to come in, and that is really, it's going to be more of a, let's say, an opinion question for you, Nick. I think when we get to the super aggregated nature of the experiences that we're seeing now, right, this trend to pull together all of these different services into a content-first interface, we're seeing this across so many different consumer devices now, especially at the smart TV level, in some cases at the service provider level, but really on consumer devices. When we're trying to pull together all those services and to surface only the content titles first to the consumer and to aggregate that experience all together, to me, it would seem that there would be a considerable number of challenges there to really have the reach into the data that you need to understand how to optimize that content discovery process, right, across all these different services, all these different pieces of content, and perhaps differing levels of transparency or data visibility, or how much data individual services are willing to share without getting too specific about which services. What are some of the challenges here to solve, or are they solved, or how does the content discovery business, so to speak, deal with this super aggregation trend?
Yeah, sorry, I had to plug in my computer there. I think it's really interesting. Like I was saying before, I think there is such an interesting relationship between the content owners and distributors and the platforms that you're on. Um, so that's just a whole nother world, and I think that's also why we're starting to see more media companies explore building some of their own devices, right? I think Comcast announced a Sky TV, actual TV, right? You just mentioned Fire TV, and Amazon has really grown on that space. Roku has really partnered to integrate themselves with so many, really at the TV OS layer. But I do think that you have this battle between the TV platform, the device manufacturer, and then the application layer on top of it, and figuring out what slices are going to try to own a bunch of the stack, right? Like you don't see, Disney does not own a television, right? They don't own a device per se, so it's a little different, right? Whereas you have somebody like a Vizio or an LG who has both the OS layer and the device layer, and it's definitely going to be an area of potential friction, because once again, the quality of the curation inside of your own app allows me to control much more of the experience, right? When it goes into someplace else that I don't control, which is also kind of what we see in the world of like fast channels today, right? And if it goes into a place that I don't necessarily have as much control, it makes it a little bit more difficult, and it's more of a business discussion to be able to understand. Hopefully in the future, we'll see more data sharing. I think it's valuable, but once again, there's definitely going to be some friction between people who own the device and the OS versus who have the application layer. Because once again, as a publisher, I'm building, the ways to do recommendations, the way to personalize those things. And do I want to give that much data back to a platform to pass through to their recommendation system or not? I don't know, right? And that's kind of that's going to be the question in the future. Is it more basic viewing behavior, right? And not suggestive, or is that where there's a hybrid model, right? Where somebody like Apple, who has their own original programming but can surface from your apps, right? Is that the strategy that they take? So I think that's a big question for sure, because everybody's going to try to improve search and discoverability, and there are multiple layers at which people are going to try to solve this problem. And so ultimately, it really depends on how much of that stack you own to have the most control.
Yeah, I think it comes back to one factor that's becoming increasingly important is again data, right? I mean, who owns the data and at what level? And as you alluded to, some of these smart TV plays that we see as of late, Comcast, Amazon, and so on. If you own the metal, then you can control everything upwards from that, right? And so I think it's going to get harder and harder. Well, there's only a few players that are able to actually develop their own hardware and platform and so on that are able to do that. But I think for the consumer, certainly they would wish that there was equal access to everybody's data for the egalitarian level of access to data, so that their personalization or the level of personalization of their experience could be as personalized. That sounds clunky,
Yeah,
but it could be as relevant to them as possible, right? Using the best
totally.
available. So
Well, that's the biggest channel. The problem with the fast channels right now, right, is like I have one slice in somebody else's app, and I only have limited amount of data to know what's working, what's not working on
right,
that. Whereas, if I had more data, or like you could get when you measure with your own app, right, then I could actually make meaningful recommendation, and then that brings value back to that fast provider. So I think that's what we're moving into now, is this realization that there needs to be more data sharing in order for the services and the OS layer, because they're going to need to get the most value too, unless they want to put up the money to buy their own original content, right? Ultimately, they're going to have to allow the content to be discovered and not put too many hooks into the process along the way to make sure that there's still reasons that people want to buy their devices.
right, right. So let's while we have a few minutes left here, let's jump to our next Q&A or Q&A question from the audience. And this one is, any tips on how to optimize images and synopses or content descriptions for better recommendation or discoverability in the platform?
I mean, I probably could spend a while going into it. It's probably more of like a longer question, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's multiple sets of ways that you can look at it, and that's a testing thing, right? Because it depends on how much space do you give for the synopsis and the content discovery, right? What does the UI look like, and how do you lay that out? What are the methods that text is being used to crawl or surfaced, right? If it's something that's picking up more web search, or if you're more focused on using that internally just in your own kind of owned app ecosystem. So there's kind of more variables to maybe give one single answer on that. I would say in general there are more ways than ever before to bring additional metadata into your system. So whether you work with services that do metadata mapping, like what you can get from like a Gracenote, Rovi type situation, right? Or augmenting data through APIs even that other services provide. And then finally, things like computer vision, right? Where you can, scan that content to add additional metadata and text into it. And there's lots of companies out there that are getting really intelligent about that and being able to, break down your videos into more like even identifying the stars that are in it without in areas where you might not normally be able to find some of that data easily, right? Because it's all about the quality of metadata in to get the best result out. So a lot of directions that you could go on that, but yeah, in general, I think that there are more ways than ever before to optimize content testing, or A/B test different copy that you might be using, or evaluate the value of the length of a type of a content. So I think it's a lot about experimentation, and certainly if you can, A/B testing is always a great way to try simple experiments like changing up copywriting.
Okay, and that's we have an additional, I believe here, a follow-up from the same asker of that question. It looks like it's just context to their position. As a content distributor, we don't own the data of the platform. We don't have the insights for personalization. For example, we only distribute. Let me go up through this view here. We only distribute
Yeah,
content
that's
on
kind of the
Amazon.
problem.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or not, but I feel like well, I mean, like just two parts with that. One, I would love to chat with this particular asker about how they're distributing content to see if there's some way we can help. I would say to get more specific. But on the flip side, if you don't own the app, right? If you push into like a fast channel, I'm just going to use like a Roku channel for example for right now, or if you upload your content into a Netflix, right? This is where you might have to look at other types of signals. If your platform doesn't have a good data sharing agreement, or you're not able to go and negotiate a better one. Conviva also, we measure a lot of social analytics, right? So we measure owned social content for tons of the world's largest media companies, right? All of the posts that they publish on the channels. And we have lots of those folks are distributors, right? They don't own, or they might sell a piece of content to their production company maybe, and they sell a piece of content to an NBC, but it's their job to basically build and promote and market the show and build a community around the content that they have. So in the absence of getting data from the platform directly on consumption, you can also look to other tools like social listening or social analytics to be able to get a proxy at least for viewership and consumption. So once again, that's more of a general answer to a potentially specific question.
Okay, thanks, Nick. We've got time here for maybe one or two more questions. So this latest one that came in. So streaming services feel stuck in their version 1.0 form, and media asset management systems expressed through a traditional UI, buttressed by curation. We began this discussion highlighting the problem of churn and finding something to watch. Do you believe that there's a role for narratives, the missing to the existing curation?
I think it means you need like to have a point of view. If I'm understanding this right, is what I think he means, like the doesn't, like the guide, right? The missing guide. So who shepherds you into the experience? And I would say, and I hope I'm answering this right, but that's where I feel like I watched a lot of Disney Plus. I think it's great. They have all the old movies and old cartoons and stuff. Like, I think it's fascinating to kind of watch all the old, old media that was harder to find. And who doesn't love some good superhero movies from time to time? I think Disney Plus has one of the best, if I'm understanding this question correctly, that idea of a guide. So there are elements of personalization and curation that happen inside of there, but they're very much as a narrative to the types of content, to the storylines of the content that aren't using data at all, right? So being able to look at Donald Duck throughout the years, right, or Mickey Mouse, or even the way that they've combined all right, cool. So the way that they've combined the concept of the Star Wars saga, right? So really giving you an ability, and even the way that I think obviously Disney Plus also breaks up based on a lot of the main ideas, right? Nat Geo, Pixar, Marvel, classic, Disney content. They really do walk you through all of that, and then add also that other element. And so that's kind of what I was talking about before, is that it really needs to be this combination of art and science, right? Your brand is building a streaming service. It's not, we have a bunch of video that's data enabled to tell you what you like. That's not really what a customer is buying. A customer is buying a subscription to a library of content to be a part of that, right? And being a part of having that access to that content, or being able to build lifestyle moments around those, right? People forget that it was such a big deal when you used to crowd around in the Disney sense, right? Like they had the Wide World of Disney, or that might be the wrong name, right? But the Sunday night big Disney show, right, in the 50s and 60s that they used to broadcast, that was like a cultural moment, just like a Monday night football game is too. And it's about being a part of an experience. And with linear TV kind of obviously rapidly declining, we have all of these live and live-ish type experiences, and that guide concept, that point of view that each streaming publisher needs to bring into the space, that's really your USP. And then ultimately you want to bring that experience into all of the touch points that the consumer interacts with you, right? So I always use Disney because they're well known at being able to really carry the brand through every aspect of the customer experience. And literally it's the exact same thing when you go into the Disney Plus app, and you can see all of these different storylines, and you can see these different curated fields. And yes, they're doing a lot of data analytics and personalization and segmentation, but at the same time, if you really just want to go in and find all of these old movies, right, they're going to show you a strip of lines that help to curate that. So I think that's kind of core also to the business of streaming, right? So no matter if it's from the product or marketing level, or down to your customer service, like what is that experience that defines your streaming brand, the content that you're acquiring, and the type of experience that you want people to have. And yes, I think that we do need more of that storytelling. That's why I like Disney Plus so much. I think that's why you're starting to see Netflix bring a little bit more of that in, although I think it's aggressively more data. I do think Hulu is trying to bring a lot of those ideas into here. And that's, I think, a huge opportunity to close the gap. Once again, if you're not the big four and you have your own streaming service, you can also figure out, well, if you can have that awesome experience, that's like super core to making somebody feel like they want to be a part of that more than just buying media or subscribing to media to watch. It makes them really feel like they're part, I keep saying community, right? But like feel like they want to be a part of this community of streamers. If you're the horror, Shudder, right? You want to bring in people who love horror films, want to watch horror films, want to talk about that, right? They want to be a part of that community. Whereas, somebody on Hulu, sure, there's just a lot more variance, right? And it's more of like, it's at a point, it's more around the diversity of content, but especially when you get into these smaller services that are going to be more niche, that is super important to have that POV and to have that branding throughout the whole experience.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points there, which is especially in this environment, there's a big three, and then there's a steep fall off from there, right? I mean, there's so many services competing for, the amount of the pie that's left, and their ability to really grab consumers and keep them engaged and keep them subscribed comes down to how well they manage a lot of tangible intangibles, if you will. So I think that the power of community, right, the power of word of mouth, or actually I think community is a good way to really leverage the power of word of mouth and recommendation and personal endorsement. And I think that that's something that is difficult to capture, but it's really essential, I think, for a lot of these smaller and more niche services to really delve into as they build out their experiences. And with that, I'd like to bring things to a close. That's all we really have time for today. I wish we had more time, because there's so much to talk about in this when it comes to discovery, and how much it can influence the OTT experience and its role, and how that's going to be increasing going forward. So I'd like to first thank all of you in the audience for attending today for a discussion of the role and importance of content discovery. And we'd also like to thank Nick Cicero for his time and invaluable perspective today. And of course, we'd like to thank Conviva overall for sponsoring this webinar and making today's discussion possible. So we hope that you found this informative, and that you'll join us again for future Parks Associates webinars to come. Thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone else, and take care.
Thank you all.